Tanse, I'm Cree. Welcome to APTN National News. Thank you for joining us. Canada has been notified by the U.S. that it will officially be subject to 25% tariffs effective Tuesday.
We're not looking for a concession, putting up a wall, and the wall is a tariff wall.
Canada will be hit with 25% tariffs across the board, with an exception on energy, which will be 10%. Mexico and China were also notified. Mexico will face 25% tariffs with no carve-outs for energy. China will be hit with 10% tariffs across the board. The tariffs will take effect on Tuesday and will remain in place until the flow of fentanyl is addressed, which was the reasoning provided for the tariffs. On that fentanyl topic, Trump says Canada has played a central role in the fentanyl crisis, allowing the deadly drug to flow south across the border. Saturday night on CNN, Ontario PC leader and Ontario Premier Doug Ford said Canada isn't the problem.
I can tell the American people, Canada is not the problem. The problem is the Mexican border and China. That's where the problem is.
But a former Border Service officer says regardless of who's to blame, it's time Canada steps up its border security.
We have allowed the Americans to be the crutch for our border security. We haven't put the investment into border security like we should, just like we haven't put the resources into our military as required by NATO. We've relied on the Americans in a very, very significant degree to ensure our national security and border security. And it's high time that we take our own sovereignty and our border seriously.
The Trump administration's tariff order includes suspending a duty-free exemption for shipments under $800 in value, known as the de minimis exemption. The U.S. says it is viewed as the loophole that allows for shipments of fentanyl and its precursor chemicals to remain under the radar. Meanwhile, in Saskatchewan, a judge in Prince Albert is in the middle of deciding whether or not the federal government failed to support two Northern First Nations during the ongoing opioid crisis. In the fall of 2023, the Lac La Ronge Indian Band and the Peter Ballantine Cree Nation filed a class action lawsuit against the federal government, saying that the medicine chest provisions in Treaty 6 should have prompted the feds to support and provide medical care. Both Lac La Ronge and Peter Ballantine want the federal government to create a plan to help cover emergency help to deal with the opioid crisis and provide treatment programs and addiction support with Indigenous healing practices at the center. The RCMP in Alberta is asking the public's help in finding a man who has been charged with second-degree murder following a death of a young man last November on the Ochese First Nation, 250 kilometers northwest of Calgary. RCMP say 27-year-old Derek Vizar Whitford is armed and considered dangerous and is wanted in connection to the killing of 18-year-old Travis Strawberry from Ochese. Police say Whitford may be in Ochese or the Sunchild First Nation, but he could also be in Red Deer or Edmonton. RCMP say last November, Strawberry was killed in Ochese and his body was later found in a wooded area in the Clearwater County. Whitford is also wanted for several other of unrelated charges, including robbery and firearm offenses. If you see Whitford, do not approach him and immediately call 911 or Crime Stoppers at 1-800-222-8477. Assembly of First Nations National Chief joins us next to talk about her upcoming trips to the U.S. to meet with Native American leaders on the tariff issue. That interview when we come back in about 3 minutes. Welcome back. Assembly of First Nations National Chief Cindy Woodhouse Nepinak has plans to meet with Native American organizations in the U.S. to talk about the upcoming U.S. tariffs as well as a treaty and border mobility rights. Woodhouse Nepinak says she looks forward to meeting with chiefs and leadership of national organizations south of the Medicine Line, including with the J Treaty Border Alliance, to discuss the next steps in ensuring First Nation voices are heard, their rights are upheld, and freedoms are protected. The AFN National Chief joins us now. Thank you so much for speaking with us. Can you when you will be going to the U.S. and who you will be specifically meeting with, and what are your priorities when you get there?
Oh, absolutely. Look, I'll be, well, as National Chief, first of all, I stand with First Nations across both sides of the border as we strongly condemn the unilateral imposition of 25% tariffs by the United States government. And I think that it's very short-sighted actions by the President Trump and his offensive statements about forcing Canada to become part of the United States through economic coercion are very unacceptable. Canada will never be the 51st state of the United States. These actions, they're an affront to the spirit of fair trade and unjust burden of First Nations communities whose lands and resources are integral to the economic well-being of both Canada and the United States. First Nations have inhabited these territories long before colonial borders were established, and this historical fact and our territorial integrity are recognized under international law. We will be, of course, traveling to the United States a few times this year, and we've already, like the NCAI and the Assembly of First Nations, have an MOU that we signed back when Phil Fontaine was National Chief, and certainly the president of the NCAI and myself have been in discussions, and I think that it's important that we discuss the renewal of that document and update it and work together on that. So that's kind of one of our push. Will also be, of course, later this week I'll be meeting with the AFN executive and talking about our next steps, as well as meeting with the J Treaty Border Alliance. So there's lots of work to do, and I want to uplift chiefs and leaders from across the country, like the Tsotena First Nation, for instance, and there's a chief from Sturgeon Lake in Saskatchewan that has been doing some of the work, as well as of course the Kahnawake and many of those nations in Quebec, First Nations in Quebec and Ontario. So there's lots of people doing lots of outreach on both sides of the border, and I'm so proud of First Nations for doing that work. Because the tariffs that come into effect this week threaten the economic stability of First Nations enterprises.
Yeah.
They will disrupt crucial supply chains, and they'll undermine the principles of respectful nation-to-nation and government-to-government relationships. Yeah. So we will be traveling this month to meet with leaders of many Native American organizations to discuss impacts on our inherent and our treaty rights, including the right to maintain spiritual, cultural, economic, and social relations across the borders.
National Chief, 25% tariffs from the U.S. are expected to hit Canada tomorrow, along with a 10% tariff on Canadian oil. You talked about it a bit there, but can you explain how this will impact our many nations in Canada, and what is the AFN's plan to address this?
Yeah, well, certainly. Like I said, we'll be meeting with the J Treaty Alliance, we'll be meeting with our regional chiefs, and we'll be meeting with experts on this issue all week, and we'll have more to discuss about that once those tariffs hit and how that impacts. I think that there's so many discussions happening across this country, and I just have to say that I know that there's a Team Canada approach, and I think that the Team Canada approach needs to make sure when it comes to trade and border discussions in 2025 that it must include First Nations expertise and perspectives. I also encourage all premiers to make sure that they're meeting with leadership in their provinces on the traditional territories of First Nations lands. And I think that this hasn't happened quick enough, which is, I know we've come a long way in this country. We have a long way to go. And when provinces and the federal government are meeting, I want to uplift, of course, Justin Trudeau, I want to uplift him for including us and for having those discussions with First Nations on a weekly basis as Prime Minister. I also want to uplift, of course, Pierre Poilievre, who's been, having discussions with myself as well over the past number of weeks. And, other political parties in Canada. I mean, I know that we're all united, but at the same time, when provinces push back on First Nations being at the table, that's not a good thing. They don't supersede First Nations. And so I think sometimes here in Canada, when we want to talk about a Team Canada approach, that we need to make sure that we're including First Nations perspectives and making sure that First Nations people are around the table.
National Chief Cindy Woodhouse Nepinak, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Chimigwech.
Carleton University's School of Journalism and Communication has announced its plans for a new program for Indigenous students. APTN's video journalist Bruce Dela Cruz has more on the story.
On January 29th, Carleton University launched their certificate program in journalism in Indigenous communities. This one-year program will allow Indigenous students to learn the basics of journalism in the comfort of their own communities.
Today is a historic day. Canada's first journalism school affirms its commitments to the First Peoples of the land.
emceeing the launch was Duncan McHugh, an award-winning CBC journalist and associate professor at Carleton University's School of Journalism and Communication. McHugh is a Anishinaabe and a member of the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation in southern Ontario. With 25 years in the business, McHugh can sum up his biggest takeaway from reporting in Indigenous communities in one word to his students.
But it all boils down to respect. Because for so long, our people have not been treated with respect from outsiders. And that is what needs to change with journalism. But we have to understand this history of disrespect that our peoples have experienced when it comes to interacting with all kinds of outsiders, including journalists, and start to act with respect.
Partnering with Carleton University is the First Nation Technical Institute, a not-for-profit organization that specializes in post-secondary Indigenous learning. Adam Hopkins, Academic Senior Vice President, explained the process of students learning in their own communities.
The whole idea of this program is to take the program to the learner and to create space that allows them to keep their commitments. So this program and the programs that Indigenous institutes offered are focused completely on that typical learner. Bring the programming to them, make sure that the supports are in place to identify what's important to them, and think of really creative ways to ensure that they're successful and that we're doing everything we can be doing to make sure they're successful.
Finally, Hopkins gave his opinion on why it's important to him for Indigenous stories to be told by Indigenous storytellers.
It says to me that the stories that our learners will tell that are in this program are going to be grounded in our ways of knowing. They're going to be grounded in the relationship that we as Indigenous people have to the land, because our stories, our knowledges, are based on place-based knowledge and are tied directly to the land and the relationship that we have with the land.
The first group of students start the program in September 2025. Bruce De La Cruz, APTN National News, Ottawa.
We now want to tell you about last week's web poll results. Last week we asked, if alcohol companies put health warning labels on their products, would it make you think twice about how much you drink? 27% voted yes, 38% said no, and 35% said they don't drink. Next we asked, do you think Alaska's wildlife refuge should be open to oil exploration? Majority of you voted no at 81%, 10% said yes, and 9% were unsure. And lastly, should there be stricter regulations on AI in Canada? Overwhelmingly said yes at 79%, 11% were unsure, and 7% said no, and 3% said current regulations are sufficient. Thank you to all who voted. You can go to our website at aptnnews.ca to check out our latest list of questions there for this week. T.R. Whitley and Clarence Iron is up next to share some language lessons along with a look back of Hereditary Chief Bill Wilson. We'll be right back. On the east, St. John's -6, Charlottetown -6. Happy Valley, Goose Bay -18, Cartwright, Sunny and 16, -16. Gaspé -7, Quebec City -8. -8 in Ottawa, Peterborough -1. Big Trout Lake -18, Thunder Bay -15. -20 in God's Lake, Puckatawagan -23. -24 in Princess Harbour, Sun and Dauphin at -25. -26 in Yorkton, Saskatoon -30. -24 in La Ronge, Uranium City -30. Sun in Grand Prairie at -25, Fort McMurray -24. -23 in Calgary, Red Deer -24. Kamloops -10, Campbell River -1. Sandspit -4, Smithers -15. -14 in Whitehorse, Watson Lake -34. -28 in Yellowknife, Wrigley -26. Sax Harbor -14, Pawlatuck -14. -20 in Whale Cove, Chesterfield -22. -30 in Clyde River, Agulhak -26. With February being I Love to Read month, APTN News and TR Wheatley will bring you a series called Mother Tongue Teachings here on our noon show. We will take you to the root of Indigenous languages and introduce you to a phrase of the day from speakers from across the nation. We start with Clarence Iron, who speaks Plains Cree and is part of the Hockey Night in Canada crew on APTN. He's bringing you a popular one-liner he often says on the program.
Cree sentence of the day, Clarence. Let's work with he shoots, he scores.
He shoots, he scores. I'm going to make a little play-by-play thing back in the day when I used to listen to the Montreal Canadiens, Danny Gallivan. All right, here we go. Mago Kala, Fleur, Lambert, and Shatigoti. Iwaskaya, Puyula, Fleur, Vatati, Sagatit, New, Mutaku, Mutigu,
Words of advice to people out there who may want to start learning their language.
Yeah, well, you got to start at home. That's where everything starts, is at home. You got to start speaking to your kids if you have, and don't be shy, you know. It's because of that residential school syndrome, you know, that's, I was in a residential school, you know, that's, I never lost my Cree, but I kept it because, you know, I kept talking to myself. It's still Cree, but he shoots, he scores, you know. Back in that day, they used to have a bow and arrow. So they used to say, you know, mutahwi, and yeah, mutahwi, yeah. And when you go hunting, when you shoot, you know, with a gun, yeah, paskis sigiu, because ahchapi is the bow, agas is that arrow, and when you used to shoot, mutahwi. So yeah, mutahwi, pitigahil.
So slow down with me. Pe, mo, ta,
quiu. Pe, mo, ta, quiu.
And then the next word?
Pihtigwahil. Pihtigwahil.
I'll say them all together.
Pihtigwahil. Mota, quiu, pihtigwahil.
I love that. You can go to our website at aptnnews.ca/our stories to check out TR Wheatley's Mother Tongue Teaching Series. A new one will be uploaded every weekday this month. Last week, we brought you the news of the passing of Hereditary Chief Bill Wilson. He was known for going toe-to-toe with the late Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau and a strong advocate for Indigenous rights. APTN's Tina House takes a closer look at the man that was Bill Wilson.
Hereditary Chief Bill Wilson, Hemas Klalilikla, was born in 1944 in Comox, BC, and passed away on January the 24th, 2025. His contributions to the fight for Indigenous rights in Canada is legendary. Corey Wilson is one of Bill's daughters. Today, she is at the Museum of Anthropology, where they have an entire section dedicated to their people, the Kwakwaka'wakw. She says culture was a huge influence on their family.
So all of these masks, like it's tradition that you can't just pick up a mask and go and dance with it. You have to be chosen to do it.
He was a force of nature for sure. He comes from a long line of hereditary chiefs and leaders in our community, Kwakwaka'wakw community, nation. One side is from the Musqueam-Zawatinik territory, and the other side is from the Liquituk territory. And he was raised to be a leader and raised to make a difference in the world.
And many would agree, make a difference he did. Bill Wilson was well known for going toe-to-toe with former Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau at the constitutional negotiation talks in 1982, where he spoke about his daughters Corey and her sister Jody Wilson-Raybould in the documentary Dancing Around the Table.
I have 2 children in Vancouver Island, both of whom, for some misguided reason, say they want to be a lawyer. Both of whom want to be the Prime Minister. Both of whom, Mr. Prime Minister, are women. Tell them I'll stick around till they're ready.
Both Corey and Jody Wilson-Raybould both not only became lawyers, but Jody became the Attorney General of Canada, eventually stepping down after her own fight with Pierre's son, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau.
He knew we could be anything. We could be the pinnacle of in the Indigenous community, and we could be what people often consider the pinnacle in Canadian society, which is Prime Minister or Premier or CEO. He knew that we could do or be anything that we wanted.
It was also at that same talks that Bill Wilson took a lead role in stopping the government from changing the Constitution to remove the obligation to negotiate self-government. Robert Phillips is with the First Nations Summit. He says Bill's legacy will carry on for generations.
Well, I think first of all, condolences to the family, you know, the Wilson family, the community, the nation. In fact, all First Nations and Indigenous people owe something to Bill Wilson as one of the, dare I say it, foundational fathers. You know, someone that I grew up listening to. Some of the greatest speeches I've ever heard have come from Bill Wilson.
Corey says that her dad strongly believed in the leadership potential of all Indigenous people.
Every single one of us has a responsibility to ensure, and you know, the word of the day, advance reconciliation, but really it's to ensure that there's full inclusion and equity in Canada and that everybody has a place. It's unacceptable in 2025 that Indigenous people are still at the negative end of pretty much every socioeconomic indicator in land that is ours. I think that's what he would want, and then he'd just tell us to get over it, get on with it. So. Stop crying around about it.
A celebration of life for Himas Kla'lili will be held on February the 23rd, 2025 in Campbell River, BC. Tina House, APTN National News, Vancouver.
And that's your daytime newscast for this Monday, February 3rd. We're back again in a few hours for your evening newscast with more news stories. Make sure to join us then. From all of us at APTN National News, hi miigwech masicho. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you again next day.